and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Talent. This is the show where we get to sit down with some of the experts and we discuss a variety of topics around talent optimization. Today, we're joined by Shannon Howard, one of our very talented product managers here at the Predictive Index. Shannon, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Of course. Now, before our company went fully remote in the past couple of months, Shannon, you were already a full-time remote employee. And I remember when I had first started the company, they told me that you were basically the gold star of remote employees. You were able to create these connections and actually bond with people, even though there was so much of a distance. Now, that's one of the main reasons we chose you today for this interview, is because today we're talking all about how to build successful relationships within the workspace. But before we talk about how to build those relationships or connect with people, let's first discuss what they are. Shannon, in your opinion, what makes a relationship at work successful?
That's a great question. So I think what makes a relationship successful is understanding who people are. I think all relationships, and I think sometimes we have this tendency to think that work relationships are so different from everything else, but it's really all relationships have the same thing, right? They take time, they take consistency and an understanding of who the other person is and how you relate to them and what your expectations are of each other. So whether that's a friendship or a romantic relationship or a work relationship, it's just figuring out who is this person, who am I in relation to them, how do we interact with each other, and then just getting to know that person. And I think instead of making it more complicated, just considering it like the way that you would build a friendship. Just approaching it in the same way could make it, I think, a lot simpler.
That makes sense. So would you say that there's no major differences to relationships outside of work versus ones that are in work?
Maybe the biggest difference with the one in work is I think that our expectations are usually higher at work because we rely on other people to be able to get our jobs done, and that impacts how our work is done, and then ultimately could impact our feeling of job security. So I think there's this at work, you want to be able to trust and rely on the other people that you're working with and have good working relationships because your livelihood in some sense depends on it. So I do think at work, trust is, in all relationships, trust is critical, but especially at work, I think trust is super critical because you're relying on these people to be able to do the work that you set out to achieve together, but also because your work in general just depends on how well you work together with these other people.
Right. That makes sense. So basically, success is more along the lines of having that trusting relationship, having that understanding between each other is kind of what I'm hearing. So that's what success looks like, right? And obviously that's a very high level version of it, but how do we get there? What are some of those first steps that an individual can take to build a successful relationship?
Sure. I want to say the first thing is to get to know the other person, right? Like know who they are, what matters to them, at work, what drives them. So I used to work in our content team and I was writing about team cohesion, and there are 14 million, if you Google team cohesion, 14 million results that show up. And it's, why is this so hard? Why can't we get this right if there's so much information out there? And it's because we often approach trying to build these work relationships or trying to build a team from the perspective that everybody works the same way that we do, or they think the same way that we do. And we don't always understand that people are fundamentally wired differently. So I may be wired, my co-product manager and I are wired completely opposite. Like we are very behaviorally different. I take off, he's much more thoughtful. And if we didn't have that understanding, we'd probably really not get along and rub each other the wrong way, because I'd have this expectation that he was going to be like me and I would just kind of be the way that I am, and then be like, why were you so irritated that I'm taking off and running after this goal and like just trying things out and seeing what happens? And if we didn't have this understanding of how we each work and how that impacts the other person, it probably wouldn't create a great foundation of trust, right? So I think it starts with getting to know those other people, how they're wired to work, where there are areas of difference that could become problems if you weren't aware of it.
So do you have any examples of what you do to actually get there and you're able to connect with that person or understand them better on that behavioral level? So you said, your product manager, you're both pretty opposite. What did it take to get you on the same page?
Sure. So Part of it is time. It takes time to get to know people and who they are and what matters. I think you could, some people, I love this exercise. It's like how to work with me. People I met a guy who works at HubSpot, and that's what he does is when new people join his team, he says, this is how I work and this is what you should know about me. And sometimes I can be overly direct and I'm not trying to be rude. It's just how I communicate, right? And so don't take that the wrong way. Just know that that's kind of who I am. And so they level set expectations from the beginning. Here at PI, we use our own product. We use the PI behavioral assessment to understand how we're wired to work. And that's very convenient because very early on in my working relationship with Joe, we were able to pull a relationship guide and kind of understand, here's how you're wired to work. Here's how I'm wired to work. Here's what's probably going to go well based on that. And then here's some areas that you may want to be cautious about and put some more awareness, attention, and energy around addressing those areas. So I think whatever way you approach it, being intentional, knowing that good relationships of any variety take effort and that you need to put in the time and energy to make sure that it's you're set up for success.
Right. I think that makes sense. I do something similar with that regards. Like whenever I join a new team, I try to give like a little synopsis of who I am just so people know. And it doesn't always have to be as, as blunt as like, here's who I am at work, but it's just some type of connection to get people to understand what my interests are or what I like to do. I think it was easy with the team that I'm on right now, just because it was already based around a hobby that I have. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. I can just jump in. But sometimes it's not as easy as that. So it's just finding those little connections, I guess, and finding a way to show who you are so people can show themselves, right?
Yeah, I like that. The vulnerability and being real. I mean, we are real people, and we sometimes forget that when we come to work, we don't just shed the selves that we are outside of work. We come in with the day that we had or what's going on in our lives, and that impacts how we show up at work. And I think finding those ways that you can bond with other people. I know a lot of our colleagues enjoy horseback riding. So every time someone new comes on and they say, oh, I like to ride horses, I know 5 people that, hey, you should connect with these people. You'd probably like talking with them. And that's something that they can kind of start to build a relationship over.
Right. Yeah. I had the same thing. One of my biggest passions is video games. And the minute I said that in a all company meeting, when I first introduced myself, a ton of people right after the meeting came to me and they're like, you should join this channel. You should talk to this person. You should talk, like everyone wanted to like connect me to another. So I think it's also
I'm pretty
building.
Sure I told you.
Probably. Yes, probably. So it's all about building that culture, right? Of wanting everyone to connect. So, and that's what you could do definitely on an individual level, right? But in your experience, is there anything that a manager or a leader can actually do to help those team members build that relationship? Because it can't all just be on the one individual solely, right?
I do think a lot of it does come down to the individual making time to interact with other people and build personal relationships. My husband was a personal trainer, and I use the analogy of you can't have your personal trainer do the work for you. Like you have to do the work for yourself. Right. And in the same way, managers can't build relationships between their employees. The employees have to do that for themselves. But I do think that managers can support their employees by creating time for it. So here we use I don't know if it's called a donut or the coffee donut. I kind of call it just coffee donut app on Slack. And it randomly pairs people from around the organization with another person every 2 weeks. And so as part of our culture, every 2 weeks, you're spending 30 minutes getting to know someone else. I think managers could also make time for team building activities, or whether it's in a stand-up, just taking time to get to know each other personally. At one of my old companies, when we had team meetings, we had this question, what's new and good? So we would just start the meeting with maybe 15 minutes. I mean, we would spend a significant amount of time just talking what's new and good in your life, what's going on. And that let us get to know each other personally, which helped us to understand what was going on in that person's life that may be impacting their work and how they're showing up right now. But then we get to know who they are as a person and understand what their interests are and where they're coming from, which I think also helps us to have those better working relationships because we know them on a personal level, not just a professional level.
Right. It can be challenging, but let's talk about, once we've actually made that successful relationship, or once we're getting closer. A relationship is something where you can't really just say like, oh, I was a good person, I had an icebreaker, I met the person, and now we're good, we're friends, we're colleagues. You can't just be like that. You have to have more of an ongoing, purposeful, deliberate way to build those relationships. So in that regard, what can an individual or a leader do to help maintain those successful relationships? And is there anything that you should be actively avoiding?
Sure. So I think in your question, you kind of framed it. So part of what you can do is be consistent. Relationships take time. They take consistency. People
Mm-hmm.
need to know that you're reliably and consistently going to be showing up. And I think sometimes we want to check things. I'm a list maker, and I like to check things off a list. But
Right.
relationships aren't lists. They're not lists outside of work. They're not lists at work. You can't just say, well, I Slack messaged this person today, and thus I have done my work and building this relationship. It takes time, and it takes a back and forth. It also takes kind of understanding the expectations from different people, how often they want to be checked in on. Some people want to be checked in on more frequently. I know something that I do to try to maintain relationships is just know what's going on in people's lives that's important. You recently closed on a house and moved into your new house. And I know other people are in that process too. Yeah. I mean, I'm waiting on mine, but getting to know people outside of work and milestones and things like that, so and so's having a baby or moving into a house, and checking in just to see how that's going and not always making it about work, I think is something that people can do, is work to build those personal relationships, because yes, you're at work, but this is a person that you're interacting with.
Right.
In terms of things to avoid, I think I don't know, other than just thinking that it's a checklist or something that you can do quickly. Just avoid having the expectation that because you work together, everybody should act a certain way or interact a certain way. Um, yeah, it takes time and effort. And if you kind of drop the ball in a relationship and you come back and think it's going to be great, not really realistic. Like, you drop the ball, and you're going to have to work to rebuild the trust in that relationship, however that looks.
Right. And I think to that same point, my next question is very similar to if you do drop the ball, right? When it comes to people that working with people, there's always a chance for disagreement. There's always chance for conflict. And sometimes, we've talked about it in previous episodes, sometimes conflict can be really good if handled correctly and if it has the right
Hmm.
intentions. But in other cases, sometimes it can go really bad. And that can be
Sure.
tough to keep those relationships strong when tensions are so high, even if it is good conflict, right? So, in your
Hmm.
experience, how do you deal with these situations of conflict, but also manage to maintain or possibly even improve a work relationship?
Oh, yeah, I love this, because I think I often can appear as a confrontational person, or people think that I love conflict, which isn't true. I just think
Mhm.
that conflict is normal and necessary, and I've kind of normalized that part in my life. There's never going to be a point at which everyone agrees on everything all the time. Again, all people are different; they're coming at things from different angles and perspectives. If everybody's in agreement all the time, then you probably don't actually have a healthy team. You have a team where there's one dominant personality and everybody else just kind of falls under that.
Right.
And so conflict is a normal, natural part of it. I think when you experience conflict, part of it is just normalizing it, making it part of your culture. It's not a bad thing as long as you're engaging it in a healthy way. Disagreement is normal and acceptable. Um, Flying out the handle, not normal or acceptable, but disagreement and conflict is normal and acceptable. So to normalize that and make it part of your culture, and then seek to understand from each other. What's your perspective? I know my boss talks about positions versus interests. Sometimes we take a position on something, but we don't explain what our interest really is. So I want this because this is what I'm trying to achieve underneath it. I want to invest in X solution because what I'm really going for is this here. I want to be able to do or accomplish this thing, and being able to kind of step back and understand that for different people. And again, I think it comes down to assuming the best intent, understanding people are coming at things from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. They're not there. No one is at work with the intention of frustrating you and causing you to have a bad day, right? They're coming at it with their experience, from their perspective. If they're bringing up something or they're disagreeing, they're not doing it to be a troublesome person. They're doing it because they care. People who mm-hmm. don't care don't say anything. People who do care speak up and they say something when they have a disagreement, and because they're trying to make something better. So I think normalizing it, understanding where people are coming from, and again, too, using that, like having some kind of shared language. So here at PI, we use the language of behavioral drives. So we have dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. So we could kind of use that language. I know I mentioned my co-product manager, Joe, and we have this code word, pineapple, just for fun. And if we have a disagreement, we'll throw that in our meeting agenda, and we'll be like, I have a pineapple. I need to talk about something. And it's like a funny way to just break the ice, break the tension, and just address something head on and say, this kind of thing is going on, probably wasn't intended this way. This is kind of how I felt about it. Can we talk about it? And then you get to work through it. But I think the biggest mistake people make with conflict is pretending it doesn't exist and sweeping it under a rug. But that erodes trust, because then you end up with people who have bitterness and resentment towards each other. Then they don't want to work together, or they don't really trust other people to do their part or be reliable. And then you end up with a dysfunctional team.
I love the pineapple thing. It's great.
It cracks me up every time. I can't even be mad that there is a pineapple because it's a pineapple.
Right. It's too weird to get, heated about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have some way of just smoothing things over from the get-go.
I really like that, because I think the problem, especially in these kind of situations, like you were saying, is that people get heated because they are passionate about what they do, or because, as you said, they care about something. They mm-hmm. either want something a certain way because they feel it's the right way, and whatever that reason might be is something that we should either hear out as a group or, be able to talk about. And that's that understanding of saying, like, okay, tensions are high, but let's just level the playing field. Let's, take a step back. Let's realize it's just a pineapple and find a way to, to move on from that, whatever that action might be. But I really like that. But before we wrap this up, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about your time as a remote employee, because specifically right now, we're in kind of a weird time where a lot of companies are possibly going full remote, going, partial remote. We're not really too sure what's happening in the world. And I think it's interesting because there might be a lot more companies that are fully remote for a lot longer than even just when a pandemic is over. And for that reason, because you were such a success, such a gold star, as they said, what are some remote specific activities or steps that individuals can take to build those relationships at work? So, for instance, what are some of those examples of things you did that made you a gold star?
Okay. So I think it's helpful to preface, I've been working remotely for like 10 or 11 years. And most of the jobs I've had have been remote. So that has always been normal for me. Right. I think where people can struggle with remote relationships is that it's not the way that they've done things. So they think that it's totally different. But relationship building is relationship building. And I don't know if anybody listening to this or watching this has had this experience, but you meet someone online through Facebook or Instagram, and you build this friendship, and you have never met this person in your life. And then maybe 5 years down the road, you meet in person. And I've had this happen where you meet someone in person and you can't believe it's the first time that you met because you know each other so well. Relationships are not about proximity to people. It's about the time that you invest in people. So I think changing our mindset that remote work relationships aren't harder, they're just different. And I think, some things that I've done that I think are helpful is scheduling time with people. When I was in a smaller team, I just set aside 30 minutes to chat with the different people on the team, just personally catch up, maybe professionally. What are you working on? Is there any way that I can be of help to you? So making the time to invest in those relationships, build relationships with people. if you do have the opportunity to see people in person, which maybe you don't have right now, but spending time with people, when I would go to the office, those would be kind of my social calls. It'd be an opportunity to get to know people. And that was the most valuable action that I could take at that time. And then not everybody will agree with this, but I follow people on social media. At this point in my life, I don't really love using Instagram in general, but I love following the people that I work with because I know things like that this person was building a skating rink for their kids in the front yard, and this person just finished their deck, and this one just had their bachelorette party this weekend. And so I can stay in touch with the things that are going on in their personal lives and reach out and have a point of connection that isn't just about work. So not everybody's going to agree with that, but I think it comes down to mindset, time, intentionality, and then finding ways to connect with people personally. And maybe that's even, if you don't want to follow people on social media, a Slack channel. At PI, we have a PI parents channel where people will post photos of their kids or things that they're doing with their kids. Mm-hmm. We have hobby related channels where you can connect with people. So just a way to connect with people on a personal level.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Just to the same point of, meeting people for the first time, even though you've already known them for years from I started just in my own personal life, I have a podcast that I do, and I had no idea the person that I was doing it with. I didn't know him at all before this. I ended up starting it with him, and he's one of my closest friends now, because we've been doing this for 2 years together of just talking to each other every one day a week and just getting to know each other. And so it's one of those things where, to your same point, that mindset of you don't have to be next to the person to build that relationship. It's just getting past that hiccup or that issue with just thinking that that's all we've known, because generally the internet and all of this remote stuff is fairly new if you really think about it. But getting to that point where saying if you're able to communicate with them in some regards, you're building that relationship, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you live away from your family, I live 3.5 hours from my family. Doesn't mean I don't have relationships with them. It just means that I don't see them in person every day or even, every week.
Yep. I think that makes sense. Shannon, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.